Constantinople, Anthimus, whose election had been furthered by Theodora. In the year 536, however, the Roman bishop Agapetus, who had come to Constantinople to plead for the Gothic king Theodahad, then hard-pressed by Belisarius, had sufficient influence to bring about the disgrace of Anthimus, and Minas was raised to the vacant throne. The latter, in the year of his election, held a council at Constantinople, at which Anthimus and other leading Monophysites were excommunicated, and Justinian forbade Anthimus and Severus to enter the capital. Meantime, Agapetus had died at Constantinople, and the deacon Vigilius, who was in his company, is said to have made a compact with Theodora that if he were chosen pope, he would disregard the Council of Chalcedon and re-enter into communion with those who refused to accept its definition. In his absence, Silverius had been chosen pope in Rome, but Belisarius, then all-powerful in Italy, at Theodora's bidding, easily procured the banishment of Silverius on a charge of treason, and the election of the time-serving Vigilius, who managed to hold his own against the rightful pope. But in the midst of the Orthodox West, he found it impossible to keep the promise which he had made to the heterodox Theodora. His duplicity is indeed very evident, for while to the Monophysite bishops he professed entire agreement with their principles, to Justinian and to the Orthodox Patriarch he declared his perfect orthodoxy. Meantime, Theodorus Ascidas, bishop of the Cappadocian Caesarea, had presented himself at the imperial court and gained the confidence of the emperor. This prelate persuaded Justinian that he might gratify the Monophysites without actually rejecting the decrees of Chalcedon, if he were to condemn not only Theodore of Mopsuestia, whom even the Orthodox held in suspicion, but also the treatises in which Theodoret had opposed Cyril, and the letter of Ibas to Maris, although at Chalcedon the two latter had been expressly declared orthodox. In the year 544 he accordingly issued an edict in which all these writings were condemned, commonly known as the Edict of the Three Chapters or Articles, which was generally welcomed in the East, but steadily resisted in the West. Justinian, nothing daunted, summoned Vigilius to Constantinople, where he succeeded in persuading or compelling him to issue a formal decision to the same effect as the edict. But in yielding to the emperor, he gave the gravest offense to the clergy of his own province. A synod in Illyria sent to the emperor a set defense of the writings which he had impugned. In Africa the condemned writings were defended by one of the ablest men of the time, Facundus of Hermione, who wrote in a fearless and candid spirit without regard to temporary popularity. He saw clearly the evils which sprang from the constant hair-splitting of the Greeks, from the tendency of ignorant persons to pronounce arrogant judgments, and from the interference of the civil government, which, after all, cannot coerce men's thoughts. Guided by him, the African bishops not only controverted the emperor's views, but also formally excommunicated Vigilius. Under this pressure, the unlucky pope summoned courage to refuse to accept a dogmatic statement, embodying the condemnation of the three articles, which the emperor put forth in the year 551. Justinian, much perplexed, summoned a council at Constantinople, known as the Fifth Ecumenical, which Vigilius refused to attend. He even defended the condemned writings in a formal ordinance. The council thereupon, under the emperor's influence, approved all the edicts on matters of dogma which he had put forth, and directed the name of Vigilius to be removed from the list of those commemorated in the Eucharist. While these things were done at Constantinople, Narses had restored the imperial authority in Italy, and the Pope saw with dismay that even in Rome he would not be out of the reach of the emperor's arm. It was perhaps this consideration which induced him to accept the decrees of the council, which he did in 554. In the following year he left Constantinople to return to Rome, but died on his journey at Syracuse. Pelagius, who was chosen as his successor by those who favored the emperor's proceedings, ignoring his own previous declarations, at once accepted the decrees of the Fifth Council. Justinian was even still not weary of interfering in theological controversies, and shortly before his death, in his eagerness at all costs to bring the Monophysites back to the Church, he declared the views of the Aphthartodokitae to be orthodox. Eutychius, Patriarch of Constantinople, was banished for refusing to accept this, and Anastasius Sinita, Patriarch of Antioch, only escaped a similar fate by the death of the emperor. His successor, Justin II, did not attempt to carry out his policy. Justinian's attempt to regulate the dogma of the Church, while it alienated the Western Church, did not win the Monophysites. On the contrary, it was in his reign that they drew together and formed separate communities. Few of the Egyptians accepted the Patriarch of Alexandria, who had been appointed under the influence of Justinian. The great majority chose a patriarch of their own, and so formed a schismatical church which was never reconciled. And the Ethiopic church cast in its lot with the Alexandrian. In Armenia, also the Monophysite party, favored by the Persian rulers of the country, gained the upper hand towards the end of the 5th century. Early in the 6th, the Synod of Theoria declared itself in favor of Monophysite views, and about the year 600 the Armenian church ceased to be in communion with the Iberian, which adhered to the decrees of Chalcedon. In Syria and Mesopotamia, the Monophysites, persecuted and forsaken, seemed on the point of disappearing altogether, when they were revived by the extraordinary energy of Jacob Baradai, and in consequence came to be called Jacobites. In the West, too, there arose a long-enduring schism in consequence of the acceptance by the Roman pontiff of the decrees of Constantinople. The churches which acknowledged Aquila as their metropolis renounced communion with the Roman Church, as did also the western portion of northern Italy under the authority of Milan. Never perhaps was the dignity of the See of Rome in so great peril as in the days when the weakest of the popes was brought into collision with the strongest of the emperors. The papacy lost for the time the prestige of independence, which was its proudest prerogative. The strong hand of Gregory the Great brought back Milan and the greater part of northern Italy to the Roman obedience, but it was at the cost of ignoring the Fifth Ecumenical Council. End of Chapter 11, Part 4. Read by Sean